I'm Emily, 34 years old. My husband Bob is 7 years younger at 27, and we don't have any children yet. Although I'm older, I never really felt the age difference while we were dating. But it became apparent when we decided to get married and I first went to greet Bob's parents at their home. Bob's parents, living in the countryside of the Northeast, were incredibly conservative and initially, they were quite opposed to me being older than Bob, saying things like they say you should search high and low for an older wife. But 7 years is too much. Can Emily even bear children properly? Won't her eggs age as she gets older? Remarks that could potentially make enemies of most women. Although the father-in-law was rude, the mother-in-law outright rejected me. I won't accept this. Why does Bob have to marry a woman who is 7 years older than him? It's too embarrassing to even mention to the neighbors. He will soon return here to take over the family business, and you, with your city upbringing, are not fit to be our daughter-in-law. Bob and I had been together for 6 years, and I had devoted almost all of my late 20s to him, so I had already decided to marry him. Rather, we had been living together for a few years, and I didn't have the energy to look for someone else. In my desperation, I pushed Bob into proposing, and he somehow agreed, though perhaps due to his youth or just his nature. He seemed to prefer keeping our relationship as it was. When faced with opposition from his parents, he quickly changed his tune, saying, "See, I told you it was too soon to get married. We can just register our marriage later." I told Bob, "No, it's not too soon. The age difference won't change no matter how many years pass." Before turning back to his parents and greeting politely, "I may indeed be older than Bob, but that's something I can't change. I will do my utmost to make you feel that I was a good choice for a daughter-in-law. I'm not perfect, but please accept me." The parents reluctantly agreed, but Bob's sister was vehemently against it, saying at our first meeting, "Just so you know, don't call me your sister-in-law. It's totally unacceptable for my brother's wife to be older than me." Looking back, I was naive, but with the odd confidence of a salesperson who had dealt with difficult clients at work, I thought I could handle it. This must be what they call bride bullying. I told myself it was lighter than what I'd seen on the internet and took the eventually moving back to the countryside to live with the in-laws lightly, even though it was news to me. I should have called off the wedding then, but as they say, hindsight is 20/20. A year has passed. I completely regret getting married. We had been living together before, and nothing much changed after submitting the marriage registration, in terms of work or lifestyle. But one major change was that Bob started getting frequent calls from his mother. I knew what they were about. When she's asking when we're planning to move back home, and probably also telling him to divorce me soon. Whenever the calls come, Bob would move to another room or the bathroom, trying to keep me from hearing. But given we live in a small apartment, it's easy to overhear. So whenever someone mentioned, "So, Emily was saying," I couldn't help but eavesdrop. And it seemed they were saying I was against the idea of returning to Bob's hometown to live with his parents. That's not the case at all. When I once asked Bob if he planned to return home someday, he said he didn't want to live somewhere where you can't walk to a convenience store. And there wouldn't be any work for him either. It seemed like he was the one who didn't want to go back. Bob was blaming me for things he didn't want to face himself. It's frustrating to see Bob making me out to be the bad guy as an excuse for his own reluctance to return home. Just now, I overheard Bob in the next room saying, "So if I bring up divorce, I'd have to pay alimony, right?" His reluctance to divorce isn't out of love for me, but because he doesn't want to pay alimony. Hearing Bob's true feelings was disappointing. Now might be the best time to consider divorce, while we don't have children. I secretly started thinking of a divorce, without telling anyone. Just then, I got a call about Bob's sister getting married, so we ended up taking the express train back to his family's home for the wedding. Despite Bob being considered the heir, our wedding was just a small family dinner, while his sister's wedding was set to be a grand affair. Still, I didn't want to neglect my social obligations and create any fault on our part. The wedding was on the middle day of a 3-day weekend, so Bob and I stayed at his family's home from the day before. The groom of Bob's sister is from the neighboring city, and the wedding was to be held at a venue there, with the plan to go by a chartered bus with the relatives. On the day, as the family home was the gathering place, relatives started arriving in droves. The ceremony was just after 2 p.m. To avoid crowding the venue's dressing rooms, the venue staff, hairdressers, and dressers came to the house. And even Bob's parents were getting dressed up. Our event was more of a dinner than a wedding, so we just wore slightly nicer everyday clothes. But the difference in treatment was stark and astonishing. I changed into the dress I had splurged on for this day, did my makeup, and was setting my hair when my father-in-law said, "Hey, Emily. Serve some refreshments to the relatives who are waiting." So, with a smile, I handed out refreshments and repeatedly introduced myself as "Nice to meet you, I'm Bob's wife. Please enjoy the refreshments." Making sure to make my presence known with a smile like that of a professional TV announcer. Although my mother-in-law had told me to just stay in Bob's room, I wanted to make a good impression if I could. Soon after, the bus to take us to my sister-in-law's wedding venue arrived. The relatives boarded the bus with excitement, and when it was my turn to board, my mother-in-law exclaimed, "Wait a minute, Emily. I forgot the necklace." "The pearl necklace, can you get it?" "Really? With the formal dress?" She insisted. "It's in the drawer on top of the dresser in my room. It's a keepsake from my mother. Hurry and bring it." "Understood, I'll go look for it now." I rushed to my mother-in-law's room and searched the dresser drawer. But everything was so cluttered, and I couldn't find the necklace right away. Everyone else was already on the bus waiting, and I was getting anxious. Ah. Is this it? I think about 5 minutes had passed. I found a box that seemed right, checked inside, and hurried to the entrance, only to find the bus was gone. The entire in-laws family and Bob had left without me. You've got to be kidding. I rubbed my eyes a few times, but the bus was nowhere to be seen. I panicked and tried to look for my cell phone, only to remember it was in my bag. Since I left my bag with the luggage to be put on the bus, it must have gone without me. I knew the name of the venue but didn't have the phone number. Without my cell phone, I couldn't contact Bob, and without my wallet, I couldn't even take a taxi. What should I do? For a moment, I was in despair, but then I thought, wait, do I even need to go to the wedding? After all, the desire to celebrate the wedding had completely vanished. It wasn't just the first time meeting relatives, surely my in-laws and even Bob must have realized I wasn't on the bus. Yet, they left without me, which seemed overly malicious. The thought of divorce crossed my mind, but simply divorcing seemed too easy. Revenge was necessary. After a bit of thought, I came up with a plan. This is it. I stepped outside, saying, "Hello." I began my revenge with a smile. The relatives, in-laws, and Bob returned from the bus after 5 p.m. They were quite drunk. I had finished preparing for my revenge and had gathered all my belongings except for the bag that was taken on the bus. I looked up a taxi company's number in a phone book next to the in-laws' home phone and called right when the bus arrived, asking for a taxi in 30 minutes. Everything was ready. With an innocent face, I went out to greet them at the bus. Bob looked guilty when he saw me but said nothing. My in-laws ignored me, busy sending off the relatives. The relatives glanced at me but left in their cars. I wished Bob would at least apologize, but that's just the kind of man he was. With a smile, I said to Bob, "Welcome back." Bob looked relieved and started making excuses. "Hi. I didn't realize you weren't on the bus." I felt bad, but the ceremony was about to start. "So I couldn't come to pick you up." I ignored Bob, silently searched through the luggage for my bag. As if. What a liar. And I told him to divorce. What do you mean by this? What's this? A joke? I really didn't notice. When Bob realized what he was told, he started to panic. Who knows? I'm surprised you think such a childish lie would work. So what if you didn't notice? Are you saying you couldn't remember I existed until you saw me? Both in-laws were terrible, but the real enemy was my husband, Bob. He was silent, unable to retort, but then my father-in-law, after seeing off the relatives, chimed in, "Come on. It was just a little forgetfulness on both our parts and Bob's." Bringing up a divorce over something like this, city brides really are spineless. It seemed he was in favor of the divorce. My mother-in-law, hearing about a divorce, smirked and said, "Just as I thought, a city bride won't do." She was never right for our family. That made me furious. How hypocritical. If that's the case, you should have just invited Bob to the wedding without me. Why did you make me come all this way just to leave me behind? Anyone would be furious with such harassment, whether they're a city bride or a country bride. When I yelled out, my mother-in-law yelled back, "We never intended to invite you in the first place. There wasn't even a seat prepared for you. But Bob brought you along by mistake, so we left you." What? I was stunned by the audacity, but as I glared, Bob quickly looked away and blamed his mother. "Well, Mom didn't clearly say to come alone. So? I thought it meant as a couple." My mother-in-law's unreasonable anger continued. "And why did you go around serving tea and introducing yourself as the bride?" At the venue, relatives were asking why the wife didn't come, unaware that Bob had a wife, making us embarrassed. "That's your own fault, and it's absurd to say I shouldn't introduce myself," I sneered. Actively introducing myself as Bob's wife to the relatives seemed to have had an effect. "So you never acknowledged me and planned to divorce me eventually. That's why you kept our wedding a secret from the relatives and made it seem like just a dinner party," I deduced. Neither my father-in-law nor my mother-in-law said anything, but it seemed I was right. I truly felt it was time to sever ties with such a family. "That's fine. I'll grant you your wish and divorce you. I'm better off without a mean family and an unreliable husband." I got into the taxi that had just arrived and returned to my apartment by the last train. Unable to sleep that night, I impulsively looked up lawyers online and packed my belongings. I managed to keep myself busy until dawn, and when I woke up late the next day, I had several missed calls from Bob and my in-laws. It seems my revenge worked well. After being left behind, I had thought of a revenge plan, but I didn't want to do anything dangerous or criminal. However, I didn't want to suffer silently and just divorce without doing anything. I remembered how my mother-in-law was concerned about the neighbors' opinions. There was a surplus of refreshments and nibbles she had bought for the relatives. I bagged them up and went around the neighborhood greeting everyone with a smile. "Hello. I'm Bob's wife." And I spilled everything about how I had been treated and left behind on the wedding day. And that evening, my mother-in-law and I had a loud argument outside. Of course, the whole neighborhood heard. A perfect revenge for an in-law family concerned about their image. Afterward, Bob and I divorced smoothly. The stories I shared were just casual conversations, so I wasn't sued for defamation. Having a lawyer helped me claim compensation for the abandonment and secure a satisfactory settlement. As for my sister-in-law, she self-destructed after marriage. She had hidden her harsh personality to get married, but people don't change easily. Her true colors showed, and the marriage quickly soured. She divorced and returned to her parents' home within 6 months, but by then, the wedding abandonment incident had become a notorious rumor. Eventually, the in-laws became known as a vile family that tormented their daughter-in-law, living much subdued lives. Bob's chances of finding a bride in his hometown seemed hopeless. I learned all this from a neighbor I had befriended and exchanged phone numbers with. Serves them right. As for me, the divorce felt like a fresh start. I regretted not seeing the true nature of Bob and his family earlier, but now I could see it clearly. Perhaps it would have been best to retreat immediately when faced with opposition at our first meeting, but I was immature. I don't want to negate the happy times we had together, so I consider the past year a lesson for my future. I'm relieved to have resolved the mess and moved on.